Hi, colleagues, and welcome to episode 19 of We Will Get Through This. I'm Scott Imig, along with my colleague here, John Fischetti. We're very pleased to have you join us. And just a quick reminder that this podcast is really about helping principals around the world think about how we're addressing this pandemic now, but really, how do we come out on the other side in a better place? And John, it's awfully good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you, Scott. I know we're working together closely on a number of projects, but it seems like a long time since we did that episode about a meter and a half apart.
It really has been quite a while.
Yeah, I think for many of the great leaders out there, we're into a different phase. And I'll use the language I was using earlier with a team meeting that we had. I think we're at the end of the beginning. And so any of us who think we're now to the other side, in parts of the world, I don't even think we're on the downhill yet. So we're fortunate to live in Australia where some real tight lockdowns and some really good behavior by the citizens have put us in a good position to possibly get through to another side in 2020. But I know in parts of the world, it may be a while longer.
It's true. John, so tell me about what we're doing today.
All right, so I've kept this a top secret from Scott. We're going to just have a conversation about leadership, but I want to pose you a couple of questions. They're not trick. I've got no cards up my sleeve. It's all good. And I'm not going to ask us to disclose the people we're thinking of, but I'm going to ask you and then to reveal during the telecast here and our listeners to be thinking through. Scott, if you could think of in your career as an educator, or prior to that, because you've had other roles and other things growing up from teenager on, even when you were aware of this, what are the attributes of the best leaders you've ever seen in a tough moment? So not just the leadership attributes we could quote from the textbooks, but when a tough moment happened where you were working, going to school, helping to lead yourself, what were some of the things that those leaders did that actually helps sustain the organization or the individuals through that crisis? Does anything come to mind without being too specific? Because obviously we're not trying to out anything here. What did those leaders do that helped the situation in spite of the fact it was a tough one they were dealing with?
You know, there are some who do stand out, and I would go back and I would think about the fact that these leaders have the ability to put things in perspective. They had the ability to get everybody in the room to take a breath and really think about, okay, we recognize that this situation is traumatic for the people in the room. And, you know, given our experience in education, most of the time we're talking about situations that involve people's children. And that is, you know, in terms of people being rational or irrational, children are the kinds of things sometimes that will tip people into that irrationality. And so some of the best leaders I've ever worked with were the ones who could bring a calming tone to the room, who could get people to take a breath, as I said, and really let's engage in a conversation and realize that, you know, 9 times out of 10, the problems that we're dealing with, you know, really are miscommunications, are slights that really aren't slights, or perceived issues that aren't issues. And when they are issues, when they really are issues, it's leaders who are able to help break those down and really take them apart and figure out what's going on.
So that's excellent. So we'll come back in just a minute, but I'm going to ask you the flip question. Think of all the organizations you work with, and when the leader of the organization didn't handle it well, and what those attributes were that were pretty obvious that they either in that moment or more generally weren't up to the challenge.
And horribly, those are easier to remember. Quick to act, incredibly partisan in terms of decisions were made prior to almost hearing the conversation or the predicament or the conflict. Some of the leaders who I think struggle the most were the ones who argue in their heads while they're listening to somebody else speak. So they're actually not truly listening. You can tell the wheels are spinning, and it's how can I frame my counter argument? Yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of those that stand out.
In the schooling business, unfortunately, those situations do usually have children or adults in jeopardy. and sometimes it's a public health matter. Sometimes it's a routine health and safety matter, or it's a societal issue, whether it's a storm or it's in this case, a pandemic. If you can think of one of the worst examples, either that you've been part of or one of your family members has been, because sometimes we live this through osmosis through our children or our relatives who are in organizations themselves. Was it a fine line between handling it well and poorly, or was it a big divide between competence and incompetence in that moment?
That's an interesting question. Because from the observer, from living it, you feel like it is so obvious sometimes that you're going in the wrong direction. The leader's going in the wrong direction. But so from my perspective, yes, it feels like it's a great chasm. But when you go back and dissect the decisions, and having been on the other side where you have to make those decisions, a lot of times it's it feels to the leader like you're making a decision. You're choosing from two decisions that perhaps are not ideal. I don't think I answered your question, but
no, you're right there. I think the fine line is finer than we think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually, unless the person is really totally lost, and they wouldn't be in the job if they were totally lost, is the ability to still save the moment. And what I think we want to encourage our listeners, this great school leaders out there, those that are aspiring to be, is that some simple characteristics of leadership can possibly help guide an entire organization through a really bumpy moment. There's so many examples of what the current world brings to us that are reasonably catastrophic. Just in Australia, we've gone through a drought, incredible and tragic bushfires, and a pandemic, all in the last 8 months. That's not including the individual crises families are having, just trying to be economically viable with or without a pandemic, the illnesses that put people always worried about their family members because there's a lot of folks, dealing with whether it's elderly parents or their children who are sick or just disease. And then we have the pressures of a society that is trying to figure out politically what it stands for. And schooling sort of is the centerpiece of that. So I wonder if we mix the ideas you've shared and we said, okay, here's a principal of a school or a deputy or an aspiring leader. We've got this next several months to play out. John just said it's the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. Oh, no, it's the end of the beginning. And then we're going to continue in a mode where everybody wants it to go back to an old normal that it never will be. And so you've just said some things, and I'd love you to contribute to this list about being calm, being a good listener, being really clear in your communications, taking the time to have people have a breath, to make sure that decisions are made where people feel part of them. That sounds like Leadership 101, but isn't it doubled down during this time how vital those are? So leaders who don't bring those attributes to the conversation normally are actually really exposed during this time. No communication, really impulsive, not communicative, not really ability to bring confidence, not bringing a team along with them, having decided before the decision was supposed to be made, maybe themselves not going well so they don't project positive tone. All of those things are so vital, and aren't they even more vital now? And could we ask our audience to try to find those one or two things? This is something you do really well, and I think we talked about it in early episodes, but just trying to catch people doing well. Our head teachers, our leaders in the schools, they need to be reminded, thank you, you're doing amazing work, we really appreciate you. They needed that all the time. They really need it now. So I think the fine-tuning of leadership style is almost going to take a self-actualization for leaders to say, I've been so worried, I need to stop projecting worry. I need to project confidence that we will get through this. And I think that component of things also goes over to one of your areas of strength around coaching. And I thought we could, for a couple of minutes, pull out some of those mantras from the coaching philosophy that you help leaders all around the world learn about that might also help guide people in these times to remind themselves that almost every move they make is being scrutinized because people are looking for a leader to project that we will get through this.
I think you're exactly right. I keep thinking that this pandemic is in some way almost like a charcoal etching. You know how you have a faded stone and you can't read it, but if you put a sheet of paper on it and you etch it with charcoal, you suddenly all the fine contours, the fine lines are evident. And it's almost like this pandemic is making a lot of the inequities and a lot of the issues evident, and it's making a lot of the strengths of our leaders and weaknesses evident. Um, and I think your point that it is far more pronounced and far more important now than ever is right on target. And we the coaching philosophies that we've talked about, so much of it really has to do with we recognize that you are the leader. You are the leader of the school. You're the leader of your organization, and that creates a hierarchy sometimes, and it creates a power dynamic where people a lot of times will feel like they need to act in a different way around you. And one of the things that I think good leaders do, who are also good coaches, is they make it really clear that, you know, by virtue of my position, I'm in this role, but we're both human beings. We're both citizens on this planet. We're both trying to do the best we can. We're both working for our schools and for our people. And by virtue of that, we're equals. And that's a huge, if you believe that and if you practice that, it consumes every one of your interactions with people. So it may be as simple as that. It's going into these conversations, going into these dynamics with the recognition that the person you're meeting with, while they may work for you, you're on the same page.
Yeah, that level of trust in a relationship is pretty extraordinary. You talk about that a lot in the coaching model of building that trust. It's hard to repair it if it wasn't there before the pandemic, but it's never too late to start building it. And I had an idea for one of those things that could go that direction, because I think in many cases, each school is held back by the one or two staff members who might not be going well, or they're the most sort of hesitant to embrace new ideas. And certainly in the times we're in now, anybody that way has probably been outed for the fact that they're not very comfortable in what's going on. So one of the things I think a leader can do, and again, I think this is easy to do your own way. This is not John's way. And you could do it the Jacinda Ardern way and just be so freaking good at what you do and create confidence, that a whole country can attempt to eradicate a disease many haven't even started to control at all, because she's got that it factor as a leader.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we all can be that. I think it just comes down to trust and credibility, and people will follow that. But I think if we claim what actually is going okay, in spite of the tragedies that are amongst us, the uncertainty that's amongst us, and the worry that's still prevalent. And if I look at our young people today, and with 3 teenagers, you would know this better than I right now. But what's good about this is it's testing our ability to accept change, which I'll call a future focus skill. If schools have been working on that, we didn't know the first half of 2020, we'd be practicing accepting change, like 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
We'd be honoring flexibility, right? We really testing that. And for some young people, some of our top students, flexibility isn't their strength. They know what's right. They know what the A is, or the HD, or whatever system we're using. And that uncertainty and flexibility is really getting in their way because they're not quite sure how to handle that. Thriving in the ambiguity, because the way in which we're going to negotiate this is we're not sure. And the assignments teachers are giving in some of the online stuff and back at school now a little bit is left with deliberately ambiguous. Interesting that that's a future focus skill as well. This notion of self-regulation for many young people, having to take charge of their learning because they're given these 3 or 4 things they need to do, and they're going to do it at their own pace and their own way, as opposed to be told when to shift, when to go to the next class, when to have lunch, all that stuff. I think that's amazing. Self-regulation could be the foremost future focus skill. And then this notion we talked about a couple episodes ago about the common good and promoting that. Isn't it really good? We've been practicing sharing and caring for the last few months now, and really saying what's right for our society. So if we look back, I think leaders' job is not just to try to take care of all the hard stuff and deal with the tragedies and make sure we got the right hand sanitizer in the right places. I think it's about promoting that although this is clunky, it's not perfect, we didn't sign up for it, actually some pretty interesting things are happening, and our young people will be fine. And we will get through this because of their resilience, but also a chance to do some things that weren't even on the docket because we were going to try to hurry through, the first 10 chapters of the book in the first half of the year and get to exams in the time we thought. So inquiry and invention and innovation and creativity and problem solving are all full on. They haven't been shut down by COVID-19.
Got a little
help.
Yes, got a little help here. John, I agree 100%. And you said that children are going to be fine. And I think not only will they be fine, I think you're right. I think they're going to be better than fine. Mm-hmm. This has taught them, this has taught all of us something about flexibility and about adaptability that was vitally important. And there's no going back.
Yep. So I think our task for our listeners today from today's episode will be to look at those things that are actually going well, maybe the unexpected wins, celebrate that, claim that. And if you have been having trouble projecting that positive future-looking tone, to really get out there and do that. Your team is looking for that. They're looking for the signals that we will be okay. Mm-hmm. We can't gloss over the serious issues and still the journey that's ahead. But along the way, we've done some remarkable things and we're going to have to claim it. And our staff are looking for that inspiration, even more than we might think, because in tough times, that's where even some arrogant, sort of obnoxious, sort of rude person such as Winston Churchill was maybe a good fit for the time to carry Great Britain through a really troubled time. I don't know if it wasn't a tragedy like almost the invasion by Germany of the UK that Churchill would have been renowned, because he's a pretty ornery sort, but he found his way to be in the right time in the right place and do the right thing.
Exactly right.
Well, this has been episode 19 of We Will Get Through This, Transformative Leadership for Disruptive Times. Scott, great to be with you today. We look forward to our next episode, and thanks to all the listeners who have contacted us with some amazing feedback, and we thank you for all you're doing.
John, I enjoyed it. It's good to see you again, and thanks to the listeners.